this video, we are going to talk about different types of symmetry. The first type of symmetry that we are going to talk about is being symmetrical with the x-axis. So if you will look at these two graphs, they're symmetric with respect to the x-axis, or in other words, if we fold these types of graph on this x-axis, the parts above the x-axis and the parts below the x-axis would actually lie on top of each other. So if you're looking at the x-axis and think about folding your graph on that x-axis, the top of the graph will lie on the bottom. So that's what x-axis symmetry will look like. Now, looking at y-axis symmetry. Graphs like this are said to be symmetric with the y-axis. So, if we folded each of these graphs along the y-axis, you will notice that the left of the y-axis, the parts that are on the left of the y-axis and the parts on the right of the y-axis will lie on top of each other. So that's what y-axis symmetry will look like. All right, the last type of symmetry that we are going to look like is called origin symmetry, or being symmetric with respect to the origin. So you can tell if it's symmetrical with the origin if you fold the right half or the left half, either one, of the graph across the x-axis. So think about folding this lower half on this first graph across the x. So that would make it, hang on. So again, if I folded this bottom half across the x-axis, it would end up there. Now think about folding this blue part across the y-axis. What's going to happen is it's actually going to land on top of the other part of the graph. So when you're talking about origin symmetry, think about folding one half of the graph across the x-axis and then the y-axis, and that will show you if it lies on the other part of the graph. That will tell you that it is origin symmetry. Let's look at this other graph on the right. So again, I'm going to go with the left half of the graph. If I folded this across the x-axis, so I'm talking about this part right here, I'm going to fold it across the x-axis, which would make it lie right there. And then again, I fold it across the y-axis, which means it's going to lie on the other half of the graph, which means it is symmetrical with the origin. Okay, in the last part of this video, we're going to talk about what it means to be an even function and an odd function. An even function are graphs that are symmetric with the y-axis. In other words, if you fold the left of the graph across the y-axis, and it will land on the right side of the graph. An odd function are the graphs that are symmetric with the origin. So just like that last pictures that we were looking at, if you are symmetric with the origin, if you can fold one half of the graph across the x-axis and then again across the y-axis, it will land on the other part of the graph. So let's look at this first graph on the left. Okay, and remember, these are hand-drawn, so they're not going to be exact. But let's look. Here's my y-axis. And if I folded this half of the graph across that y-axis, it is going to land on the other half of the graph, which means this graph would be an even function. The graph in the middle, so it's not symmetric with the y-axis. So we know it's not even. So let's look at what would happen if we folded the left half of the graph across the x-axis first, which would make it land right there, and then fold the left half over the y-axis, and you'll notice that this will land on the other half of the graph. So this one would end up being an odd function. And this last graph on the right, you'll notice that this one, if I folded it on the x-axis, the top part of the graph would land on the bottom half. But being symmetric with the x-axis does not make you even or odd, which simply just means that you are neither even nor odd.